The date is September 6, 2005. A group of executives is sitting across from representatives at Merrill Lynch, staring at a contract that will either resurrect their dying empire or bury it forever. Marvel Entertainment is about to sign for a $525 million non-recourse financing deal. But there is a catch. A massive, terrifying catch. To get the cash, Marvel has to pledge the film rights to a group of key remaining characters as collateral. If the movies they plan to make fail, the lenders could claim those rights. The stories and the soul of the company, gone. Marvel had already sold off its biggest stars just to keep the lights on. Spider-Man was at Sony, the X-Men were at Fox. They were a bankrupt comic company trying to survive in a world that thought they were a relic of the past. This $525 million gamble wasn't just a business deal. It was the ultimate all-in bet. If these films don't work, Marvel risks losing control over some of its most important remaining film properties. This is the moment Marvel stops being a licensing company and decides to become a studio. To understand how Marvel ended up in a room negotiating a high-stakes $525 million financing deal, you have to go back to the early 1990s. At the time, the comic book industry was on fire. Speculators were buying up issues by the dozen, convinced they were investing in future gold. Sales were artificially inflated, and Marvel was riding high. But then, the bubble burst. By the mid-90s, the market collapsed and sales crashed. On December 27, 1996, Marvel filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. They were drowning in debt. To survive, they started licensing the film rights to their most valuable characters in the late 1990s. In 1999, the Spider-Man film rights were licensed to Sony Pictures. Meanwhile, 20th Century Fox controlled the X-Men and Fantastic Four film rights. There are reports that in the late 90s, Marvel offered a bundle of multiple characters for approximately $25 million, but studios focused only on top-tier heroes like Spider-Man. By the early 2000s, Marvel watched as their characters became global icons for other people. X-Men succeeded on July 14th, 2000. Spider-Man became a blockbuster on May 3, 2002. Hollywood had finally proven that Marvel characters were valuable, but Marvel itself was only capturing licensing fees. Inside the walls of Marvel, the tension was building between survival and a new radical vision. First, you have Avi Arad. He was an early architect of the Marvel film licensing strategy. Arad believed deeply that Marvel characters could succeed in film, but the focus was on getting the deals done to ensure the company survived. Then, there is Kevin Feige. He was the creative architect who saw something others missed. While the big studios wanted standalone franchises, Feige believed interconnected storytelling could transform movies. Behind the scenes, Marvel executive David Maisel helped design the financing structure that made this gamble possible. On the other side of the table sat the buyers. Sony Pictures held the keys to Spider-Man, believing he was the only truly valuable Marvel property. 20th Century Fox was busy building its own standalone franchises. Finally, there were the financial institutions, led by a Merrill Lynch-led structured financing group. They provided the $525 million financing, but they wanted returns backed by the character IP as collateral. The internal realization was simple but painful. We're giving away the upside. Marvel was tired of being the junior partner in their own success. On September 6, 2005, the gamble officially began. Marvel secured the $525 million Merrill Lynch financing deal to produce its own films through Marvel Studios. This wasn't a standard loan. Instead of selling off more characters, Marvel pledged key remaining film rights as collateral to finance the movies itself. They chose a character that would lead the charge. Iron Man. They put a significant budget behind a second-tier hero outside of comic audiences, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. If the films failed, the lenders could claim those rights. There would be no second chances. On May 2, 2008, the world saw the results of the gamble when Iron Man was released. With a budget of approximately $140 million, it brought in a box office of roughly $585 million. More importantly, it introduced the shared universe concept with a post-credit scene. The chain reaction was instantaneous. On August 31, 2009, the Walt Disney Company announced the Marvel acquisition. The deal closed on December 31, 2009, for a purchase price of approximately $4.24 billion. Disney wanted a long-term franchise engine, and they found it. The expansion continued with the release of The Avengers on May 4, 2012, which pulled in a box office of approximately $1.5 billion. Today, the MCU is the highest-grossing film franchise in history, with a total global box office of over $30 billion. Even the Spider-Man rights eventually saw a breakthrough on February 9, 2015, when a sharing deal allowed the character into the MCU. The story of Marvel reveals a brutal truth about business. Short-term survival decisions can reshape decades of control. When a company is under pressure, it often undervalues its own assets just to see another day. But the biggest lesson is that strategic control matters far more than immediate cash. Marvel stopped renting out their legends to the highest bidder and decided to own the game themselves. They had to risk losing everything in that 2005 financing deal to create the biggest upside in film history. It is wild to think that the most dominant force in Hollywood almost ended as a footnote in a bankruptcy filing. It leaves you wondering, how many other dying companies are currently sitting on a billion-dollar future they're just too terrified to bet on? If this look into the $525 million gamble offered a new perspective on the MCU, hit the subscribe button and stay tuned for new stories every week. Thanks for watching AMPVEX. See you in the next one.